Have you ever watched people express themselves effortlessly and wondered, how did they do it? Well, this session covers it all. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said, as was famously said by Peter Drucker. Well, what's in store for you today is going to be just that. We will be presenting certain amazing nuances on the topic Communicate Right, which is brought to you by Acelot Academy. Let's look at the key learning objectives of the session. To discuss key aspects of communication, to describe elements of vocal communication, to analyze communication barriers and styles, to discuss key aspects of questions and related techniques, effective communication in interviews, and paraphrasing. Now, what is the relevance of the session? What we see here is that communication is necessary for planning. I'm sure you will agree with that. Understanding one another. To establish the effective leadership skills that you have within yourself. To increase efficiency. It is always the basis of good decision making. Smooth working of enterprise or any unit. It enhances your ability to create motivation. It enhances your coordination abilities. And most of all, it is an integral part of the interview process. So coming to the agenda of this program, fasten your seat belts, sit back, and soak up the essence of the session, which will last for an hour, filled with exciting facts, dialogues, and illustrations. We now start with the first part of this entire session, which is very, very important and extremely critical, which is understanding of oneself, and this is a part of planning and preparation, for which we use the SWOT technique. As you know, we start with strengths as far as the SWOT technique is concerned. And what we deal with here are what are the advantages that you have that others don't have. For example, skills, knowledge, certification, education, networking. It could be any of those factors, because those will be the ones that would be advantages that you have that the others don't. What all can you do, or do you do better than the others? That becomes yet another aspect of the strengths that you have. What all do others see and accept of your strengths? What is it that is seen by the others, that is seen as your perceived strength and which the others also feel is part of your strengths? And what are your achievements that you are proud of? What is it that you feel are the feathers in your cap that makes you smile? What all qualities do you possess that others don't exhibit? Now, these are things which are unique to you, and you will be in a position to utilize each of those to the best extent possible. The second part of SWOT is weakness. So when we speak about weakness, but naturally, these will be which are the tasks you usually avoid because you don't feel confident or comfortable doing them. What are your weaknesses or development areas that are pointed out by people around you? How confident are you about your education and competencies? Which are the areas you feel that you need to develop? What are your negative habits? Are you often short-tempered? How good are you at handling stress? Do you get irritated? Do you land up at places late? All of these matter. What are the personality traits that hold you back in your field? A fear of public speaking, it could be poor etiquette, and the list goes on. So this is how you identify your strengths and weaknesses. Moving on to the second half of SWOT, it deals with what we call opportunities. So O stands for opportunities. What are the areas within you that, if corrected, can give you far greater success? I'm sure this is of very great importance and significance. Do you have a network of strategic contacts to help you or offer you the right kind of advice? Do you have a situation where others failing to do something important, and if that is the case, do you take advantage of their lapses? Do you ensure that you are in a position to take undue advantage of something which is a shortcoming of yet another individual? And that is where you are able to showcase the opportunity that is a part of the SWOT analysis that you do as part of the self-preparation for yourself. We now move to the most important part of the SWOT analysis, which is threats. What all hindrances do you currently face in overcoming your weaknesses? What are those challenges that gets in the way of you achieving everything that you would like to in a most successful manner? Consider all those who are competing with you, because after all, they are all the ones who will be vying for that seat and vying for that chair that you are trying for when it comes to job opportunities or anything that it is that you're seeking. What is your world, or the demand for the things that you have that is changing and evolving? If so, are you getting geared up and ready for the same? Look at the options of changing technology. Does changing technology and skill sets that are required in terms of your various technological requirements make an impact, and does it tend to threaten your position? Have you thought about it? That be it something general or something specific. Do you often come to a point where you feel worried because you are not up to speed when it comes to technology? And most importantly, are any of your weaknesses leading you to your threats? If so, you would have been in a position to identify your weaknesses in the first place and ensure that they don't translate into threats. At this juncture, we now get into the crux of the topic of communication. So obviously, what is communication? What, in your opinion, is this very simple concept called communication? It is a transactional process that involves the exchange of ideas, information, feelings, attitudes, beliefs, and impressions. So anything that is transactional, and it is a process of passing on of information and understanding from one person or one individual to the other. But of course, there is a communication process that all of us knowingly or unknowingly follow. So what happens in the communication process? It starts with the sender. The sender formulates the message that he wants to actually share with the person that he's communicating to, converts it into language that is understandable, and sends it to the receiver. The receiver has to do his bit of the job as well. He interprets the information that he has received from the sender, gives feedback, because quite naturally communication is a two-way process, and it is but of course that once you have received a message from someone, you would have to interpret it and act upon it as desired. And finally, it moves in such a way that the final outcome is sent back to the sender, and that is how the entire process happens. One of the most important concepts when it comes to communication is Mehrabian's rule. I'm sure this is something which anyone who has any information or any interest in the field of communication is bound to be aware of. This is a very important rule which helps you understand the breakup or the split up between what should be your verbal communication content and what is the part that is actually brought in by the non-verbal part. It is that important. So when you're looking at Mehrabian's rule, what comes out very clearly is that what we think is most important, which is the words in the communication, is just a mere 7%. Please understand that in your communication, it is just 7% that is being communicated in terms of the message that you actually want to send across to the receiver, that is going through the concept of words. So where is the rest 93%? The voice tone. The tone of voice is something which plays a very important role, and that carries a weightage of 38%. I'm sure you understand that you can say the same content of the sentence in different tones and the meaning would completely change. We will see a lot of that as we go along this very interesting program that all of you are listening to right now, and you will understand what is the importance of the voice tone in communication. As we move on, the remaining part of what Albert Mehrabian spoke about is the importance of body language. You heard it right. The proportion that body language holds in the entire concept of communication is high, as a whopping high 55%. Please imagine and try to relate to the importance of this entire concept. So, between the three, we will be in a position to understand the entire concept of Mehrabian's rule. The verbal component refers to the content or the message and the choice and arrangement of our words. Body language refers to our posture, gestures using all body parts, expressions, symbols, smell, appearance, and a whole range of other parameters. The paraverbal or paralinguistic component refers to how we say what we say, the tone, pacing, and volume of our voices. So when we get into the concept of communication, and like we said, the vocal and verbal being a very important part of that entire concept, we have to look at the elements, which is the various elements which frame or form the concept of vocal and verbal communication. The first of these elements is tone. Tone is the emotion the voice expresses. It can be happy, it can be sad, it can be sarcastic, it can be firm, it can be doubtful. And just by the emotion in the voice, each one of us will be able to pick up signals that is far beyond the exact construct of the words. And that is how important the concept of tone as an element in vocal and verbal communication is concerned. This is the result of vocal components like pitch and stress. So if you're looking at tone, it is a combination of pitch of your voice and the stress that you lay on various words. Let me give you an example. If I am to say, I'm so excited, I'm sure you get the feeling that the person is genuinely excited and happy about something. Now, Imagine I want to say the very same sentence in the form of sarcasm. How would I say that? It would turn out to be something like, I am so excited. And you know, just by the way the pitch has been handled, the meaning almost completely changes. The next element is pitch. Pitch is nothing but the shrillness to bass characteristic of any conversation. When agitated, anxious or angry, the voice tends to become high-pitched or shrill, produced by the physiological activities in the larynx. Men generally have a low pitch due to a comparatively larger larynx. So when we see the importance of the next element, which is stress, stress is the emphasis on each word, not necessarily with an increase in volume. It changes the meaning of the sentence entirely and completely. Let me give you an example of a very simple sentence, which is, he's giving this car to me. When you're looking at this simple sentence, let me keep changing the stress depending on each word, and you will see how the meaning totally changes. If the emphasis is on he, the meaning becomes, he is the one giving the car and nobody else. So you are looking at a situation where he is giving this car to me. Look at the next situation where in the same sentence the emphasis or the stress is on the word giving. The meaning there turns out to be, he is giving this car to me, which means he is not lending it, but he is giving it to me. The meaning has completely changed. Going on with the very same sentence, he is giving this car to me, the focus being on the word car. So the meaning therefore becomes, he is giving this car to me, which means it is the car that is being given and not anything else. Going on further, with the same sentence, he is giving this car to me, we are looking at the emphasis on me, and there the meaning becomes, he is giving this car to me, and therefore the meaning is that I am the one who is getting the car and not anyone else. You see by the shift of stress on each of these words how the meaning of a simple sentence such as this can completely vary, and that is where we look at the importance of the word stress. Moving on to the next element, it is volume, which is a very important element when it comes to communication. Volume is nothing but the loudness of our voice, and it should be adjusted according to the size of the audience. Some speakers wrongly believe that the only way to sound convincing is to speak loudly. On the other hand, speaking too softly in a large forum can often signal low confidence. Volume becomes higher in a state of anger and anxiety. Therefore, it is very important that we be aware that the volume of the message that we communicate needs to be in keeping and in line with the scenario and the kind of environment that we are in. It is very important, otherwise it can very often lead to giving a very wrong message. Moving on to the next element of speech, it is rate of speech. That is the pace of speaking, and it is very, very important that a very high pace will make the speech difficult to understand. For instance, if I were able to talk to you about all the various programs that we have conducted thus far, and that it all has to do, you can see how incoherent the pitch and the speech was to each of the listeners, because I was speaking at an extremely high pace. However, the opposite of it, which is too slow, will make it tedious and become absolutely boring. So today we will be dealing in a very important session. I'm sure by the end of this it would have made all of you yawn and probably get up and leave, because a slow speech is often something that makes the conversation totally unbearable. Vary your speed of speech depending on the audience's familiarity with the language and the subject, because there is absolutely no point in making a communication in a forum or a platform where your message does not reach the end audience the way you would like it to be. We now come to another very important element of speech, which is pause. Pauses have to be at the right moment, and a pause can be highly effective in emphasizing an upcoming subject and in gaining the listener's attention. However, please know that arbitrary pauses spoil the speech and can be totally distracting. It is very important for a speaker to be careful about how he or she monitors her pauses. Let me tell you something. I really like this exercise. Imagine I am to stop wherever the full stop is coming in the following sentence, which is, let me tell you something. I really like this exercise. Imagine how confusing it would be for the audience in terms of understanding what you actually intended and meant to say. A pause is very powerful if used the right way. Finally, we move to the most important of them all in terms of elements of speech, which is vocabulary. Good communication is not about many words or complex words, but it is about using the right word at the right time. Any word has two meanings, and it is very important that we know what it is that we actually intend to communicate. The first way of looking at the meaning is what we call denotative. This is the literal meaning of the word. For example, stubborn means a person who does not change his or her stance, and that is the literal meaning of that particular word. Now look at the alternate option, which is connotative. This is the suggestive meaning of the word, and it refers to a judgment or a feeling or perception that one has about that word. For example, the word stubborn can be interpreted as strong-willed in a very positive way of looking at it, or totally inflexible in terms of a negative take. So when you look at each of these 7 elements of communication, it will give us a very clear way in which we can articulate our communication for the best possible results. Let's now look at another side of the entire story, and that is to do with communication barriers. Communication barriers are any kind of obstacles which lead the message to be misinterpreted, message to be incomplete or totally unclear. It can lead to negative emotions, prevents people from communicating the way they should. Now, the obstacles, you may wonder, are what? Obstacles are broadly of 4 types. The first one is physical. It could be psychological. It could be something related to technology and system, and it could be to do with linguistics. So let's look at the physical barriers when it comes to communication. It could be a crowded place. It could be noisy surroundings that are disturbing you. It could be an uncomfortable place, unsafe place, something which is being done at an inappropriate time of day. All of these relate to the physical barriers. Moving on to the psychological barriers, which too have a very, very important role to play. your emotional state. What is it that your mind is feeling at that point in time? You may have a bias towards others. You may have a perceived bias of others, and various cultural influences, your education, your upbringing, all of that has got a very big role to play, as is the case with life experience and the time in history that you're undergoing that particular episode. The next of the communication barriers is system and technology. It is as simple as a bad connection. So it could be on your phone, it could be on the internet. If you're not able to hear the person, it becomes an obstacle. Non-availability of technology or software. Organizational hierarchy getting in the way of giving you access to whatever you need to ensure that the communication is done right. Organizational processes which are getting in the way of a smooth communication. And finally, the fourth of the barriers is linguistic. Just imagine a situation if someone were to speak to you in a language that is not known to you, or someone is using jargons and acronyms which you just don't understand, or the use of incorrect and inappropriate words, or the use of difficult words. All of these put together can result in a certain amount of confusion as far as each and any one of the communicators are concerned. We now have yet another element when it comes to the entire piece of communication, and that is to do with the function of questions. Questions play a very vital and important role when it comes to communication. So what do we use questions for? We use questions to gather information, to get clarification on certain aspects, seek opinion, build rapport, show interest, and start conversation wherever necessary. It also helps bring focus to certain very important parameters that you want clarity on. So when we look at the types of questions, the most common of them all are the close-ended questions, where you elicit a yes or no response or answer. Example, do you agree? And obviously the answer, as brief as it can get, will be a yes or a no. The other kind of question is what we call rhetoric questions, where answers are obtained and known. For example, is the sun hot? I'm sure everyone knows that the sun is hot, but it is a question where you're expecting a certain kind of a response. When you're looking at the next category of open-ended questions, you elicit descriptive answers. And very often in interviews and such, it is the descriptive answers that are sought by the interviewer, because that is where you are able to explain in detail, usually formed using why, how, tell me about something, or tell me more about this, and you have to give a descriptive answer. The next kind of questions are what we call leading questions. The answer is suggested in the question in itself, and it is used to elicit a particular desired response. So you are able to influence the thought of the person that you're speaking to. For example, she is the best dancer, isn't she? It will be very difficult for you to counter that and say, no, she isn't. In all probability, you will agree and you will give a positive response that yes, she is the best dancer. Hypothetical question is yet another kind of question where you explore possibilities. It is used for introspection and analysis. Example, if you were the Prime Minister for a day, what would you do? This is something where you have to use your creativity and the various thought processes that you have to arrive at a hypothetical question's answer. The next, in terms of the communication techniques and what is considered maybe the Bible of communication, are the 7 C's of communication. I'm sure if anyone is able to equip themselves with the 7 C's of communication, you can consider yourself a good communicator. So what are these 7 C's? The first C stands for completeness, which means you convey all facts. Your message is not complete unless you have all the necessary information passed on. The second C is conciseness, which means crisp and compact message. If you keep rambling and talking on and on and on, the listener will either get bored or confused. So keep your message crisp and to the point. The third C is consideration. Step into the audience's shoes. It can be in terms of the level that you're speaking. It can be in terms of the kind of vocabulary that you're using. You can bring in all the elements of communication when it comes to each of the 7 C's of communication as well. So be considerate when you speak a certain way. The next C is concreteness, where you are specific and meaningful in what you have to say. Clarity is the next C, and that makes understanding easy. The more you have clarity in your message, the easier it is for the one listening to you to understand what it is that you are stating and therefore avoid possible confusion. Courtesy is the next C, where you respect the receiver. Use language which is respectful and the receiver feels good to listen to you. And finally, correctness. It can be along the lines of grammar, it could be data, it could be language, it can be any of these important parameters, but you need to be absolutely correct when it comes to the matter that you are conveying. So the 7 C's of communication, ladies and gentlemen, please make note of it. They will come in very, very handy when it comes to your entire communication journey. Now we are coming to a very important aspect which I'm sure is going to be of total importance to each one of you listening to this particular session. Effective communication in interviews. And here we will first deal with the verbal communication piece. There are certain pointers that I will share with you which you need to keep in mind and put to practice, and you can never go wrong when it comes to the verbal part of communication within interviews. Number 1, allow the interviewer to direct your interview and never interrupt. Use clear, concise answers. Don't ramble. Like we mentioned before, you need to be to the point when it comes to the answers that you're sharing. Don't use fillers when answering questions such as you know, like, ooh. All these kind of sounds are totally distracting and take away from the essence of what you are trying to say. Don't exaggerate and don't be negative about anything in any way, because no one wants to be listening to a negative message being conveyed and they will judge you as a negative person. Listen to what is being asked and answer appropriately. It is very important that you listen so that you are able to give the right answers. Use proper grammar, no slangs or dangling participles, because they are the kind of words that can actually throw away any person who's interviewing you and create a certain amount of dissonance and discomfort. Maintain an appropriate sense of humor. Humor, again, very subjective to the kind of situation, to the person related, as well as if you have a good inherent sense of humor. Otherwise, refrain is what I would say. And don't make excuses for yourself or put yourself down at any given point in time. Coming to the non-verbal communication, it is very important how you greet the interviewer with a firm handshake. It is important that the handshake not be a bone crusher where you leave the interviewer in pain, or be a limp handshake which gives the feeling that you are a weak person. Ensure that you maintain steady eye contact. It shows sincerity and helps establish a good rapport right from the start. Communicate positive facial expressions and speech qualities. It always helps. Demonstrate enthusiasm and interest by virtue of your posture and a friendly smile. Smile again needs to be used appropriately. Ensure that you are not smiling all the time and use a smile wherever genuinely necessary. Dress in conservative business attire. Refrain from squirming or any other unintentional nervous behavior because that gets easily picked up by the interviewer. We now come to the communication styles. So when it comes to communication styles, there are basically 4 categories, which are aggressive, passive, passive-aggressive, and assertive. Let's look at the first one, which is aggressive. As the very name suggests, this is a style in which individuals express their feelings and opinions and advocate for their needs in a way that violates the rights of others. These are people who are self-centered and would like to have the very frequently used usage, which is my way or the highway. Aggressive communicators are verbally, physically, or emotionally abusive. These are people who use very strong language, which can often result in the receiver feeling hurt and upset. The second category are the passive. The passive communicators, this is a style in which individuals have developed a pattern of avoiding expressing their opinion, feelings, protecting their rights and identity, or meeting their needs. These are people who are too shy or too scared or too timid to stand up for their own rights, and this is also absolutely very wrong. The third style is something which is interestingly called passive-aggressive. This is a style in which individuals appear passive at the surface but are actually acting out anger in a subtle, indirect, or behind the scene kind of manner. These are the ones to watch out for because often they are two-faced. And finally, the best of them all are the assertive ones. This is a style in which individuals clearly state their opinions and feelings and firmly advocate for their rights and needs without violating the rights of others. Assertive communication is born of high self-esteem, and assertive communicators are often most looked up to because they are the ones who are truly the best form of communicators. So my 2 bits of advice to you: try and learn the assertive style of communication because that is how you are going to be heard and listened to the most. Talking about listening, let's talk about the topic listening. The process of receiving, constructing messages from and responding to spoken or written non-verbal messages is called listening. Now please know, to hear something with thoughtful attention is what is listening, and there is a big difference between listening and hearing. Hearing is purely a physical process and it is natural and it does not evolve or involve any amount of thought processes where you are actually thinking through the content of the matter. For instance, you could be sitting in a room where there is a fan running at full speed and you are hearing the sound of the fan. It is as simple as that. Whereas when we look at the concept of listening, it is a physical and mental process where you are trying to understand the matter and the content of what was being discussed, and it is an actually learned process. It is a skill. Listening is hard and you need a lot of practice when it comes to listening. You need active listening in interviews. And to have the ability to be a good listener when it comes to interviews, how do you actually demonstrate yourself as a good listener is the question. There are a few tips you can actually resort to. One is answer the question being asked. Secondly, your body language should show that you are actually someone who's attending to what is being said. Take notes during the interview. That shows that you're listening. Tie your answers and replies back to things that were already discussed earlier, and that clearly goes to show that you were listening. Body language is a very important way to show that you are listening, not interrupting the interviewer. This becomes yet another sign that you're listening well. Take a moment to think after a question is asked. Don't jump in with a reply and give the wrong answer at the end of it all. Make sure you have turned off your cell phone. That shows your seriousness to listening and being an integral part of that particular interview. Concentrate on listening for their name or title. This is something which most of us goof up on, especially when you're introduced. You're too preoccupied and you straight away forget the name of the individual. Don't let your guard down knowing that you've already finished the hard part and you're now moving towards the end of the interview. That is a time where very often interviewers can throw various funny questions at you which can totally catch you off guard. So these are some of the important pointers that you keep in mind when it comes to listening in an interview. Now, when we speak about listening, listening is often not as easy as we think it is. There are possible listening blocks too. This is where one is unable to listen because of a certain set of feelings. One could be, I must defend my position, or I'm looking for an entrance into the conversation, so I'm not even listening to what is being discussed. The thought process that why should I listen to you? I don't have time to listen to you. Or some people feel I already know what you have to say, so I stop listening. Certain others, I have an advice for you, is a common thought process. No matter what you say, I will only hear what I want to. This brings to my mind a very beautiful quote. When people talk, listen completely. Most people never listen. And this was said beautifully by Ernest Hemingway. When we talk about communication, how can we not talk about the importance of paraphrasing? Paraphrasing is simply restating what a person has said and you repeating it in your own words. Listen carefully to the information, emotions, and the unsaid. Restate in your own words, capturing the essence, reflecting the feeling, and removing any negative connotation or emotion. After that, you seek confirmation. Similar to paraphrasing, you have the concept of capturing the key points of the speaker, a shorter version of what the speaker has said, and these points relate to the concept of summarizing. In summarizing, the main idea is to capture the key points of the speaker, ensure that you give a briefer and shorter version of what the speaker has said. Use summarizing as a good way to recap, highlight, and emphasize key points. And you can begin such phrases such as, if I understand you correctly, and you can go ahead and explain the rest of what you have understood. These seem to be the key ideas you have stated. Yet another important part of conversation is small talk. What do you need to be good at to be a good person when it comes to small talk? Number one, listening skills. You need to be a good listener. You need to have the art of asking questions. Confidence is a very important aspect to make small talk. Pleasantness is very important. Bonus, wit and a sense of humor always comes in handy when it comes to small talk. Now, when we speak about communication do's, there are certain important points that you should do. Know your subject well. Maintain professional dignity. Be tolerant and fair. Have effective paralinguistics. If you are gifted with humor, use it. Project enthusiasm. When it comes to body language do's, some of the important things are maintain social gaze, always use the open palm, use a power pose, use the steeple pose, Maintain personal space. Avoid staring. Don't fidget and smile as often as you can using a warm handshake. Sit with hands and feet planted firmly. So just like you have the do's, you have the communication don'ts, what you should avoid. Avoid you messages. Avoid anything which brings out ego, emotions, assumptions, attacking the other person with whatever you say. And when it comes to body language, avoid flashing or rolling your eyes, quick or slow movements which can catch the viewer by surprise, arms crossed, legs crossed give a negative meaning. Totally avoid gestures made with exasperation. Avoid slouching and hunching over. Poor personal care is often totally avoidable. Doodling, staring at people, avoiding eye contact, and excessive fidgeting or frowning, all of these are things which needs to be totally avoided. We now come more or less to the end of this wonderful lengthy session, which is to do with the topic of communication. So now let's do a quick recap of this entire module that we have done thus far. At the start, we began with the planning and preparation using a SWOT technique, wherein the understanding of self using strengths, weakness, opportunities and threats faced by an individual were analyzed in detail. Using this, you will have a better understanding of yourself and thereby be able to perform that much better in any situation that you come across. Next, we went on to see what communication is all about. A transactional process that involves the exchange of ideas and the importance of communication in terms of passing on of information and understanding from one person to the other. Thereafter, we saw the communication process, the entire process from the sender where the message goes back to the sender, completing the entire cycle. Mehrabian's rule and the importance of the non-verbal aspect of communication was also viewed in detail, where I'm sure each and every one of you have understood how important are your non-verbal postures and gestures just as much as are important the words that you use in communication. Moving on, we were able to go through the vocal and verbal elements of communication. The first one being tone, which was the emotion the voice expressed. So whether you're happy or sad or sarcastic or firm or doubtful, all of that was shown very clearly in the case of tone. Moving on to the next element, which was pitch. That was the characteristic of the voice in terms of shrillness to bass. When agitated, you could see that the voice would become high-pitched, and in a normal scenario, you would see that the voice would be relatively at a lower pitch. Moving on to the next element, which was stress. We could see how the emphasis on each word in a sentence completely changed the meaning of the sentence, and therefore I urge each one of you to use stress to your best advantage while communicating. The next element was volume, which is plainly the loudness of our voice, and it is very important that you keep in mind the size of the audience and the forum while speaking to ensure that the volume of your voice is appropriate to the forum. The next one was rate of speech, that is the pace of speaking, to ensure that you don't speak too fast or too slow, which will make the conversation either difficult to understand or too boring. Moving on, we saw the next element, which was pause. Pausing your words at the appropriate moment would give you a lot of edge and advantage in terms of emphasizing the concept that you're trying to explain in the right manner and thereby gaining the listener's attention. So, the final one, which was very, very important, was the vocabulary, where your entire set of words that you have, an entire bouquet of words that you use in building the right kind of sentences, would be absolutely important in setting you apart from anyone else. And we also went to speak about the denotative and the connotative meaning of any word. Next, we moved on to communication barriers, and if you recollect, we spoke about the physical, the psychological, the technology or system based, and the linguistic based barriers that one could face, which would result in your message being misinterpreted or completely unclear. The physical barriers, if you remember, were to do with things like crowded places and noisy surroundings. Psychological would be to do with your emotional state or your cultural influence. System and technology could be something as basic as a bad connection for your phone or your internet, or the non-availability of technology or software. Linguistic barriers, simply to do with not being proficient in a language, or when someone uses more of jargons and acronyms or incorrect words, it makes the entire conversation absolutely difficult to understand. We then spoke about questions as a function, and we spoke about how it is important to know how to ask the right questions and the reason why questions are to be asked in the first place. Some of which were to gather information, to get clarification, to seek opinions, to build rapport, to show interest, start conversation, or to bring focus to any conversation. We also went on to show how questions could be of two types, which were close-ended or open-ended, and another two types which were leading questions or hypothetical questions. We then spoke about a very important concept of communication, which was the 7 C's of communication, being completeness, conciseness, consideration, concreteness, clarity, courtesy, and correctness. Hitting the concept of effective communication in interviews, we spoke about verbal communication, some of the key points when it came to verbal communication. How do you impress your interviewer with the right way you speak? At the same time, we also spoke about the non-verbal communication, wherein certain key points like a firm handshake, steady eye contact, positive facial expressions, enthusiasm, as well as your conservative business attire were discussed. A very interesting part of the entire module was the communication styles, which are of 4 types. The first one being aggressive, in which individuals express their feelings and opinions and advocate for their needs in a way that violates the rights of others. The second style of communication is the passive style, in which individuals develop a pattern of avoiding expressing their opinions or feelings. The third style is the passive aggressive. This is a very typical case where individuals appear passive on the surface but are really acting out anger in a subtle or indirect way. The most preferred style is the fourth one, which is the assertive style of communication. In this style, individuals clearly state their opinions and feelings and firmly advocate for their rights and needs without violating the rights of others. We moved on to listening skills and the importance of receiving constructing meaning from and responding to spoken or non-verbal messages, the very crux of the concept of listening. And we also saw the difference between listening versus hearing. Active listening in interviews, a very important part of the entire module, was dealt with very much in detail, and I urge each and every one of you, especially those of you who are preparing for interviews, to kindly go through this part of the module in particular. Listening blocks. Why does one have a tendency to not be able to listen? Moving on to the importance of paraphrasing. What is paraphrasing? Which is simply restating what another person has said in your own words. And summarizing, which is a similar technique. However, summarizing is a shorter version of what the speaker has said. Small talk may seem like a seemingly very simple and silly aspect of communication. However, it is something which is very important when it comes to striking up that conversation with someone you've met for the very first time. And what you need to be good in for making very good small talk are your listening skills, your art of asking questions, confidence, pleasantness, and wit and humor. We then move on to the do's and don'ts of communication. I urge each one of you to go through these slides as well in detail, because it very clearly and beautifully sums up some of the pointers that you should do when it comes to your verbal as well as your non-verbal communication, as well as those which you should totally avoid when it comes to your verbal and non-verbal communication as well. So that was the recap of what we have handled thus far. So, in reflection, what are some of the key outcomes? Communication aids in improving one's ability to clearly transmit his or her message. That is one of the very big outcomes of this entire module. It helps improve the skills to understand messages from other people, to witness actual applications and demonstrations of the principles of effective communication. That is what you get to understand from this entire module. Prove oneself as a worthy candidate in any interview. You can go in absolutely confident as far as your communication is concerned. And finally, I leave you with 5 tips for success. Please be all ears and listen. Number 1, use appropriate style, nature of communication and medium. Number 2, ask relevant questions. Number 3, remove all communication barriers. Number 4, listen, listen, listen. It is absolutely very important. And number 5, paraphrase and summarize to get the right message. Once you are able to actually end up practicing each of these 5 very important tricks, you will be an absolute ace when it comes to the concept of communication. Emotional awareness is necessary so you can properly convey your thoughts and feelings to the other person, as has been rightly said by Jason Goldberg. Ladies and gentlemen, as you go home today, I hope that each one of you will spend a moment to think through the very important and pertinent points that were discussed here today, and that would help you work towards becoming a way better version of yourself. This is Grace Arun from Acelot Academy. Thank you.